When diplomacy dies, the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Confederation stretched before Ambassador Elena Vasquez like a vast amphitheater of judgment. Crystalline pillars reached toward a domed ceiling that displayed the swirling colors of distant nebulae, while representatives from 47 different species occupied tiered seating arranged in perfect circles. At the very center, almost lost in the immensity of it all, sat the human delegation at a modest table that seemed more suited for a coffee shop than the fate of civilizations. Elena adjusted her navy blue diplomatic uniform and glanced at her companions. Captain Marcus Chen sat to her right, his military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes, while Dr. Sarah Kim reviewed her notes with the quiet intensity that had made her Earth's foremost xenobiologist. They had been coming to these sessions for 8 months now, enduring what could only be described as the most elaborate form of institutional bullying in galactic history. The Catherian Empire held the speaker's platform today. Archon Thextar rose from his throne-like chair, his 12-foot frame covered in scales that shifted from deep purple to angry red as he spoke. His voice resonated through the chamber with the authority of a species that had conquered half the galaxy before humans had even invented the wheel. Esteemed members of the Confederation, Thextar began, his serpentine head turning to address each section of the assembly. We gather once again to discuss the human question. These creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable star system continue to demand representation equal to civilizations that mastered space travel while their ancestors were still throwing rocks at each other. Ripples of what Elena had learned to recognize as alien laughter filled the chamber. The Velmorian delegates fluttered their wing membranes, creating a sound like wind through broken glass. The aquatic Nereid representatives produced bubbling clicks from their water-filled observation tanks. Even the usually stoic crystalline beings known as the Lumina resonated with harmonic frequencies that somehow conveyed amusement. Elena felt Captain Chen's hand tighten into a fist on the table beside her, but she placed a gentle restraining touch on his arm. After months of these sessions, she had learned that emotional responses only provided more ammunition for their critics. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same emotional intelligence that had helped humanity survive and thrive was now being used as evidence of their primitive nature. The humans, Thextar continued, clearly warming to his favorite subject, claim to offer valuable contributions to our Confederation. Yet what do they truly bring to this assembly of advanced civilizations? Their technology is centuries behind our own. Their lifespans are laughably brief. Their understanding of quantum mechanics is so rudimentary that our children surpass them in their first year of education. Dr. Sarah Kim shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Elena knew this particular criticism stung because it contained just enough truth to be devastating. Human technology was indeed newer and less advanced than most species represented here. What Thextar failed to mention was that humanity had achieved in centuries what had taken most species millennia, and they had done it entirely on their own. Furthermore, the Catherian Archon raised his voice, and Elena noticed that several other delegates were now leaning forward with interest. Their emotional instability makes them unsuitable for the subtle art of galactic diplomacy. They form attachments to individuals rather than serving the logical needs of their species. They waste resources on those who cannot contribute. They make decisions based on feelings rather than calculated outcomes. This time, Elena couldn't stop herself from standing. The movement was smooth and controlled, but it cut through the Archon's speech like a blade. The entire chamber fell silent, 47 different species turning their attention to the small human woman who had dared to interrupt one of the galaxy's most powerful beings. Archon Thextar, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the acoustically perfect chamber. You speak of emotional instability as if it were a weakness. Yet it was human emotional investment that led us to develop medical technology that has saved millions of lives across dozens of species. It was our attachment to individuals that drove us to perfect long-range rescue operations that have pulled Catherian ships from black holes and Velmorian colonies from asteroid strikes. The Archon's scales shifted to a deeper red, a sign Elena had learned indicated growing anger. You dare to interrupt? I dare to respond to accusations, Elena continued, her diplomatic training keeping her voice level and professional. You speak of our brief lifespans as if longevity equates to wisdom. Yet in our short time in this galaxy, humans have prevented 14 wars through mediation, established trade routes that have enriched every member species, and contributed innovations that have improved quality of life throughout the Confederation. A new voice cut through the tension. Ambassador Krelava of the peaceful Threnody species, her forearms gesturing in what Elena recognized as a plea for calm. Perhaps we should return to the scheduled agenda. No, Thextar's voice boomed through the chamber. This interruption perfectly demonstrates why humans are unfit for equal membership in our Confederation. They cannot control their emotions. They cannot accept their proper place in the natural order of things. The Archon stepped down from his platform and approached the human table, his massive form casting a shadow over the three representatives. Humanity will accept a tributary status within the Catherian Empire, or they will be expelled from this confederation entirely. You will surrender your weapons, your spacecraft, and your right to independent action. In return, we will provide protection and guidance appropriate to your developmental level. The silence that followed felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. Elena looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who had worked with her on humanitarian missions, trade negotiations, and scientific exchanges. She saw uncomfortable shifting, averted gazes, and the terrible realization that none of them would speak in humanity's defense. Captain Chen stood slowly beside her, his hand moving instinctively to where his sidearm would normally rest. Doctor. Kim gathered her papers with hands that shook slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. 8 months, she said quietly, but the chamber's acoustics carried her words to every corner. 8 months we've sat here, contributing to every discussion, solving problems you couldn't solve, offering friendship and partnership. And this is your answer. Elena felt something cold and final settle in her chest. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a small device that she placed on the table. With a press of a button, it projected a 3-dimensional image of Earth, blue and green and beautiful, turning slowly in the space above their table. "This is our world," she said, and her voice had lost all trace of diplomatic pleasantness. 3 days ago, our Prime Minister authorized me to make a final offer of equal partnership. Today, I'm withdrawing that offer. She pressed another button, and the image changed to show the bustling spaceports of Luna, the research stations orbiting Mars, the massive shipyards in the asteroid belt. Humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Confederation, effective immediately. We will be removing all human personnel from Confederation facilities, ending all trade agreements, and recalling our military forces from joint operations. The U chamber erupted in what Elena supposed was shock. But she was no longer listening to the cacophony of alien voices. She gathered her belongings with deliberate care, Captain Chen and Dr. Kim flanking her as they prepared to leave. "You cannot simply leave," Thextar's voice rose above the noise. "The Confederation will not permit it. You are too primitive to survive on your own." Elena paused at the entrance to the chamber and turned back to face the assembly. "Archon Thextar, you have spent 8 months telling us exactly how primitive and worthless we are. Now you'll have the opportunity to see how well your advanced civilizations function without us." The heavy doors of the chamber closed behind them with a sound like finality itself. As their shuttle lifted off from the Confederation's central station, Elena watched the vast structure shrink below them. In 72 hours, it would lose 40% of its operational capacity when the human technicians, engineers, and support staff followed them home. Back in the chamber, the delegates were discovering that humans had been more involved in their daily operations than anyone had realized. The translation systems that allowed 47 species to communicate were maintained by human technicians. The traffic control systems that prevented orbital collisions were programmed with human algorithms. The medical facilities that treated delegates from dozens of different biologies were staffed largely by human doctors and nurses. Within hours, the first emergency meetings were being called, but the humans were already gone, and the vast machinery of galactic civilization was beginning to show the first signs of the breakdown that would define the coming crisis. As Elena's shuttle jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying them toward Earth in an uncertain future, she allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. They had tried diplomacy. They had offered partnership. They had endured months of insults and humiliation in the hope of building something better. When the Foundation crumbles, Commander Lisa Torres was reviewing maintenance schedules in her office aboard Kepler Station when the priority message arrived. The massive space station served as a crucial hub for interstellar commerce, positioned at the intersection of 5 major trade routes. Its gleaming corridors and bustling commercial districts housed representatives from dozens of species, all working together in what had been held up as a model of galactic cooperation. The message was brief and devastating. All Terran personnel report for immediate evacuation. No exceptions. No delays. Lisa stared at the screen for a long moment, then activated the station-wide communication system. This is Commander Torres. All human personnel report to Docking Bay 7 within the hour. Emergency evacuation protocols are in effect. Her office door chimed and Engineer Jake Morrison entered without waiting for permission. His coveralls were stained with the exotic lubricants needed to maintain the station's alien machinery, and his expression was grim. "Commander, we can't just leave," he said without preamble. "The primary fusion reactors are due for scheduled maintenance in 3 days. The Catherian technicians don't understand the modified control systems we installed last year. If those reactors go down, this station loses power for weeks." Lisa closed her eyes briefly. Jake was right, of course. Over the past several years, human engineers had been integrated into virtually every critical system on the station. They had solved problems, improved efficiency, and adapted alien technology to work better than its original designers had intended. The Galactic Confederation had been happy to let humans handle the complicated work while taking credit for the results. "Jake, we have our orders. Earth is pulling out completely. But Commander, no buts." Lisa's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 15 years making impossible decisions in the depths of space. "We gave them 8 months to treat us as equals. They chose to treat us as servants instead. Now they get to see how well they manage without us." Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. Director Yuki Tanaka stood in the central control room of the Hermes Trade Collective, watching display screens that showed the positions of nearly 10,000 cargo vessels spread across 17 star systems. Red icons were beginning to appear as human-operated ships changed course and headed for Earth. Her assistant, a nervous Threnody named Velkan, approached with a tablet full of urgent messages. "Director, we're receiving hundreds of inquiries about delayed shipments. The Altarian medical supplies won't reach the Vegan colonies on schedule. The rare Earth shipments from the Centauri mining operation are 3 weeks behind schedule already." Yuki nodded absently, her attention focused on the larger pattern emerging on the displays. Human ships represented only 20% of the total fleet, but they carried nearly 60% of high-priority cargo. They were the ones who took the dangerous routes through unstable regions, the ones who delivered emergency supplies to disaster zones, the ones who made the runs that other species considered too risky or unprofitable. "Velkan, send a message to all trading partners. Earth-based operations are suspending all contracts effective immediately. They'll need to make alternative arrangements." The Threnody's forearms gestured in distress. "Director, some of these supply chains have no alternatives. The Catherian Empire depends on human-delivered rare isotopes for their fleet operations. The Velmorian colonies need human-transported food supplies to prevent famine." "Then perhaps they should have thought of that before voting to make us tributaries," Yuki replied coldly. Across the galaxy, the withdrawal continued with ruthless efficiency. Human military advisors left their posts with alien fleets. Human scientists abandoned research projects that were years in the making. Human doctors and nurses evacuated medical facilities where they had been saving alien lives for decades. Captain Rodriguez was piloting his heavy cruiser away from the Proxima defense grid when his communication officer intercepted an emergency transmission from the grid's central command. "Captain, the Nereid commander is requesting immediate assistance. They're showing multiple system failures across the outer perimeter." Rodriguez looked at the tactical display showing the massive defensive network that protected the Proxima system from pirate raids and hostile invasions. The grid was a masterpiece of engineering, combining technology from a dozen different species into a seamless whole. It was also maintained almost entirely by human technicians who understood how to make incompatible systems work together. "Continue on course for Earth," he ordered. "Their problem now." Within hours of the human evacuation, the first cracks began to show. Warlord Vexhai had been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. His pirate fleet had been hiding in the empty space between star systems for months, monitoring Confederation communications and waiting for a moment of weakness. When the Proxima defense grid started showing gaps in its coverage, he struck immediately. His ships poured through the failing defensive network like water through a broken dam, overwhelming the confused and understaffed alien defenders. Within 6 hours, 3 mining colonies were under attack, and the Confederation's most important industrial system was in chaos. Similar attacks were happening across the galaxy. The Margrave raiders hit the Vegan trade routes the moment human patrol ships disappeared. The Phantom Collective launched simultaneous strikes against 4 different research stations that had lost their human security forces. Criminal organizations that had been quiet for years suddenly found themselves facing weakened defenses and disorganized responses. On the Confederation's capital world, emergency sessions were being called every few hours as reports of crisis poured in from across the galaxy. Speaker Mirthok, an elderly Lumina whose crystalline body flickered with stress patterns, stood before the emergency assembly trying to make sense of the cascade of disasters. "In the past 72 hours, he announced, his harmonic voice carrying poorly concealed panic. "We have lost contact with 14 research stations, 8 trading posts, and 3 entire star systems. Pirate activity has increased by 400%. Critical supply lines are failing across the entire Confederation." Archon Thextar rose from his seat, his scales now a sickly yellow color that indicated fear despite his attempts to project confidence. "This is clearly a temporary disruption. Once these criminal elements realize that Confederation forces are responding, they will retreat as they always have." "Confederation forces are not responding effectively," came a new voice from the assembly. Ambassador Kralava of the Threnodi stood with all 4 arms raised in the gesture of urgent concern. "Our military commanders are discovering that their tactical systems were programmed and maintained by human technicians. Our supply chains were coordinated by human logistics specialists. Our emergency response protocols were designed by human crisis management experts." The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by an aide rushing into the chamber with the latest reports. The news was devastating. The Kepler station had lost main power, stranding thousands of travelers. The Hermes Trade Collective had collapsed, leaving entire worlds without critical supplies. The Proxima system had fallen to pirates, who were now demanding ransom for the return of captured civilians. In her quarters aboard the last human transport leaving the Confederation's central hub, Ambassador Elena Vasquez received a priority message from Earth. Prime Minister Zara Singh appeared on her personal communicator, her expression serious. "Elena, I hope you're prepared for what comes next. Our intelligence services are monitoring Confederation communications, and the situation is deteriorating faster than even we expected." Elena nodded. "They're discovering that they never really understood how much they depended on us. The question is whether they'll learn the lesson or just look for someone to blame. Based on the intercepted transmissions, I'd say they're still in the blame phase, but that will change when the real consequences start hitting home. Are you ready to negotiate when they come asking?" Elena looked out the viewport at the stars streaming past as they traveled toward Earth. "I'm ready to negotiate with people who are ready to treat us as equals. If they're not ready for that, then they can solve their problems on their own." The journey to Earth took 18 hours. During that time, Elena received regular updates on the continuing crisis. The Altarian medical crisis had worsened when supply ships failed to arrive. The vegan food shortage had become a famine warning. The Centauri mining operations had shut down completely without human technical support. But the most telling report came from Dr. Sarah Kim, who had been monitoring scientific communications throughout the Confederation. "Elena, they're finding out that they can't actually reproduce most of our innovations. They never understood the underlying principles because they always just implemented our solutions without learning how we developed them. 3 separate research teams have now admitted that their projects are impossible to complete without human theoretical physicists. As Earth grew larger in the view screen, Elena felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. They had tried to build something better, a confederation where different species could work together as equals. Instead, they had been offered the choice between servitude and exile. They had chosen exile, and now the galaxy was learning the true cost of that decision. The transport docked at Luna Station, just as the first desperate messages from the Confederation began arriving on Earth's diplomatic channels. The messages spoke of temporary misunderstandings, of the need for immediate assistance, of generous offers for renewed cooperation, but they still didn't speak of equality, and until they did, humanity would remain silent. The price of Pride 60. Days after humanity's exodus from the Galactic Confederation, President Chen Wei stood in the Situation Room beneath the Swiss Alps, studying holographic displays that showed the state of galactic civilization. The images were not encouraging. Red zones marked areas where pirate attacks had made travel impossible. Yellow zones indicated regions where supply chain failures had created shortages of critical resources. Green zones, representing areas of stable Confederation control, had shrunk to barely 30% of previously claimed territory. The situation has exceeded our worst projections, reported Admiral Raj Patel, Earth's senior military advisor. We're tracking 47 separate pirate fleets operating in areas that were completely secure just 2 months ago. The Confederation's military response has been inadequate. Defense Minister Maria Santos highlighted several star systems on the display. The Catherian Empire has lost 6 colony worlds. The Velmorian Trade Consortium has seen their commercial shipping reduced by 70%. Even the core worlds are experiencing power fluctuations because their technicians can't maintain the fusion networks we helped design. President Chen studied the reports with the careful attention that had made him a successful leader during humanity's most challenging period in galactic politics. Any word from the Confederation government? 3 messages in the past week, replied Foreign Secretary Thomas Park, each one more desperate than the last. They're offering increased trade benefits, territorial concessions, even limited voting rights. But they're still not offering true equality. The door to the Situation Room opened, and Ambassador Elena Vasquez entered, followed by a young aide carrying a secure communication device. Elena's expression was grim as she activated the holographic projector. Mr. President, we've just received this message from Speaker Murthok. It arrived on our emergency diplomatic channel with highest priority encryption. The projection showed the crystalline form of the Confederation's chief administrator, but his usual composed demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled panic. His harmonic voice carried overtones of desperation that the translation system struggled to convey. President Chen, I address you not as Speaker of the Confederation, but as a representative of civilizations facing existential crisis. In the 60 standard days since humanity's departure, we have experienced system-wide failures that threaten the stability of galactic society. We formally request immediate consultation to address emergency humanitarian concerns. Elena paused the message. Mr. President, our intelligence indicates that the situation is even worse than their public reports suggest. The Nereid homeworld is facing ecological collapse because the atmospheric processing systems are failing without human technicians. The Lumina research collectives have shut down completely because they can't operate the quantum computers that human programmers configured for them. President Chen leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. How many civilian casualties are we looking at? Conservative estimates suggest several million if the current trends continue, Admiral Patel replied. The Confederation's crisis response capabilities have proven to be almost entirely dependent on human expertise. They're facing supply chain collapses, infrastructure failures, and security breakdowns simultaneously. The weight of those numbers settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Despite everything that had happened, these were still civilian populations facing disaster through no fault of their own. The silence stretched until President Chen spoke again. Elena, what's your assessment of their negotiating position? They're desperate enough to consider real change, but I'm not sure they understand what real change means. The preliminary offers have been about privileges and benefits, not about fundamental equality. They're still thinking like a hierarchy trying to manage subordinates rather than partners trying to build something together. Before President Chen could respond, another priority alert sounded through the room. Elena's aide activated the communication system, and suddenly the situation room was filled with alien voices speaking in overlapping urgency. The first speaker was Ambassador Krylova of the Threnody, her forearms gesturing frantically as she spoke from what appeared to be a damaged space station. President Chen, I speak for 17 member species who have broken with the Confederation. Leadership. We acknowledge that our treatment of humanity was unjust and short-sighted. Many of us voted for reconciliation 8 months ago, but were overruled by the imperial factions. She was interrupted by a rumbling bass voice that Elena recognized as belonging to war leader Thokmar of the Brutani, a species that had rarely participated in Confederation politics. Human leader, my people have faced the pirate raids for 30 days now. Our warriors are brave, but the tactics these criminals use are unlike anything we have trained for. They strike and vanish, hit supply lines instead of fighting honorably, use chaos instead of strength. We need human military advisors to help us adapt our fighting methods. A third voice joined the conversation, this one speaking in the melodic tones of the aquatic Nereid species. President Chen, our atmospheric processors are failing. Without human technical expertise, our homeworld becomes uninhabitable within 40 days. We are prepared to offer full partnership, complete equality, and formal apology for our previous actions. The cacophony continued as more voices joined the emergency conference. Elena counted representatives from 23 different species, all speaking over each other in their desperation to be heard. What struck her most was not their panic, but the fact that none of them were from the 3 most powerful species in the Confederation, the Catherians, Velmorians, or Lumina. President Chen raised his hand and Elena activated the transmission override. Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed beings, he said, his voice cutting through the alien chatter. I appreciate your individual appeals, but we need to address this situation systematically. The communication channel fell silent. Dozens of alien faces looking at him with mixtures of hope, fear, and desperate attention. Earth is prepared to discuss resuming cooperation with the galactic community, but only under specific conditions. First, any agreement must include all human citizens who choose to participate in galactic activities. We will not accept a system where some humans are treated as equals while others remain second-class citizens. Nods and gestures of agreement came from most of the alien representatives, but Elena noticed that several species were conspicuously absent from the call. Second, humans must have full voting rights and equal representation in all galactic institutions. We will not serve as advisors or consultants to decisions made by others. If our expertise is valuable enough that you need it to survive, then it's valuable enough to give us equal say in how it's used. More agreement, though Elena could see some hesitation from the more traditional species. Third, and most importantly, we're not just interested in returning to the old system with better terms. The events of the past 2 months have proven that the current Confederation structure is fundamentally flawed. We want to build something new, something better, something that allows every species to contribute their unique strengths while ensuring that no single group can dominate the others. Ambassador Krylova was the first to respond. President Chen, what you describe sounds like the ideals the Confederation was originally founded on, before imperial ambitions and species prejudice corrupted our institutions. Many of us would welcome such a change. The next few hours were spent in intensive negotiations, with Earth's diplomatic team working to establish the framework for a new galactic government. The discussions were complicated by the fact that the 3 most powerful Confederation species were still refusing to participate, apparently believing that they could weather the crisis without making fundamental changes. That belief was shattered when Warlord Vexhi's pirate confederation launched a coordinated assault on the Catherian homeworld itself. The attack was carefully planned to exploit every weakness in the Empire's defenses, using tactics that were clearly based on detailed intelligence about Confederation military capabilities. Archon Thextar himself appeared on the emergency channel 18 hours later, his scales now a pale gray color that Elena had never seen before. "President Chen," he said, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance, "the Catherian Empire formally requests immediate military assistance. We are prepared to discuss revised terms of cooperation." Elena exchanged glances with President Chen. They had expected this moment, but seeing the proud Archon humbled was still startling. "Archon Thextar, we are prepared to provide assistance to civilian populations under attack. However, military cooperation requires military partnership. Are you prepared to place Catherian forces under joint command with human officers?" The silence that followed was so complete that Elena wondered if the transmission had been cut. Finally, the Archon spoke in a voice that sounded like it was being torn from his throat. "Yes, we accept joint command." Within hours, human ships were launching from Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies. But they weren't returning to their old positions as subordinates and advisors. Admiral Patel himself took command of the Joint Task Force, with alien officers serving under human leadership for the first time in galactic history. The results were immediate and dramatic. Human tactical flexibility, combined with alien technological superiority, created a military force that was far more effective than either had been alone. Pirate fleets that had been running rampant found themselves outmaneuvered and outfought by commanders who could adapt to changing situations faster than their opponents could react. More importantly, the success of the military cooperation opened the door for broader changes. Within 6 months, the old Galactic Confederation had been dissolved and replaced by the alliance of equal species, with Earth as one of the founding members and humanity holding equal status with every other member civilization. 1 year later, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the new alliance chambers, watching representatives from 63 different species work together on problems that no single civilization could solve alone. The chamber was smaller than the old Confederation Assembly, but it buzzed with productive energy rather than hostile posturing. "Madam Ambassador," came a familiar voice behind her. She turned to see Archon Thextar approaching. His scales, now a healthy blue-green color she had learned, indicated contentment and respect. "Archon," she replied with a slight nod. "I wanted to thank you," he said, the words clearly difficult for him to speak. "My pride nearly destroyed my people. Your species showed us a better way even after we treated you with such contempt." Elena smiled. "We showed each other a better way, Archon. That's what partnership means." As she looked around the chamber, Elena felt a deep satisfaction. They had not just returned to the galaxy, they had helped create a galaxy worth returning to. The age of human subservience was over, replaced by an era of true cooperation that was more successful than anyone had dared to imagine. The silent exodus had ended not with humanity's defeat, but with the birth of something entirely new. And in the end, that had made all the struggle worthwhile.